Hello fans and friends, and welcome back to another episode of DSN's Fantasy Factory. This week, rather than discuss football, we are right in the midst of the trade deadline for Major League Baseball, so we're going to be talking a bit of fantasy baseball today. There are going to be three players in particular that we are going to be for the waiver wire, whether they are going to be available, which is probably quite unlikely for your leagues, or trading, which is going to be very important because these players are specifically focusing on them because of their trade potential. So we're going to get pretty exhaustive with this. All three of these guys are going to be people I would highly recommend that you add to your team as you make that playoff push rounding into the into either mid or end of August. So starting off, we're going to be going into a list here which has a very important category here. We have the top 50 trade candidates. Now, the reason that we are wanting to follow this is that who is being traded means that they are obviously going to be getting into much significantly better situations. That matters a ton because for fantasy purposes, we care about RBI, runs, all those sorts of counting stats, especially if you're in a category league like myself. For points, you still want to make sure that you are getting those RBIs, those home runs, things of that nature. And so kind of giving the game away here, but we will first start off with a very important player, somebody that I actually have on my team, catcher, which is always a very premium position, a big kind of equivalent to how tight ends are counted for fantasy football. Catchers difficult because you don't generally see a lot of offensive input. And so Willson Contreras is the individual that we are going to be starting off with. Now, Willson Contreras, he is the catcher for the Chicago Cubs. And his numbers this year have been pretty solid. As you can see here, pulling up Yahoo Sports, he is hitting an average of 253, 13 home runs, which he definitely is going to be outpacing himself from last season, 35 RBI. That is the number I want to talk about the most. The Chicago Cubs offense, outside of Patrick Wisdom himself, you haven't seen a ton from it. The Cubs are not a very good team. There's a reason why Contreras is being considered such a high trade candidate for the MLB. And you want to see Contreras go to a really high-end situation offensively. We really want to see this RBI number tick up. It's not going to be as low as it is, and especially compared to one of his peers, Josh Bell, which we'll be talking about. The RBI count for Contreras has been really low. There have been times where he has been ranked fantasy-wise as high as, I believe, in the 20s and 30s. As of right now on Yahoo Sports, he's sitting somewhere around 88. But given the right circumstances, depending on obviously trade partner, that the Cubs will assuredly be sending him off because they'll be getting an absolute haul for him. Willson Contreras is going to be somebody we really want to try to acquire if you do not have him already. On Yahoo Sports leagues, he is 98% acquired, so waiver wire unfortunately is not going to be an option for him. So you want to try to get a package together. I would do a 2-for-1 because Contreras is already a top 100 player as it is. Given the right situation, it is not out of the question to see him skyrocket back to that top 35 range. The next guy that we're going to be looking at, which on our list here, we have Andrew Benintendi, which is a name that some Tiger fans will be able to know pretty well from the Kansas City Royals. And we have a tracker here for Benintendi. Now, Benintendi is going to be a lot different than Contreras, and especially Josh Bell, because Andrew Benintendi is much more of a contact hitter. As you can see by his numbers here, he only has 3 home runs on the season, RBI of 37, runs of 37. But, however, hitting a 317 average, which is definitely going to wind up mattering, especially if you are in those counting stats. For my league, we actually look at OBP. And so having it where guys are getting on base, which Benintendi assuredly does on a for all intents and purposes, a putrid offense is going to be extremely important for if that is what you need. Now, to be honest, a lot of fantasy players wind up needing power a lot more than they need contact, but if you are flush with power hitting, Andrew Benintendi is going to be a great add because he is going to be somebody who's going to be thrown into either a leadoff spot, second, somewhere in that range where his entire goal is going to be to put pressure and to get on base. And so if you are in need of that, if your counting stats are desperately needing a guy who can get on base, Andrew Benintendi is absolutely the target that you should be looking for. Now, our last guy is going to be someone I've already mentioned, Josh Bell. Josh Bell is absolutely the target that every person who doesn't have him, you should be looking at him. And there is a very, very obvious reason as to why Josh Bell, and as we have in our article here, from the Washington Nationals, who we already know, there are a ton of controversies coming out about Juan Soto. That is a very serious concern, because if Juan Soto, even though it's very unlikely, is to be sent off and sent away from Washington, that is a huge part of the offense that Josh Bell is going to have to compensate for. And as you're going to see in a second, his numbers have been absolutely fantastic. As it currently sits on Yahoo Sports rankings, I believe he is in the 30s for ranking, which is extremely high compared to how he was last year. And there are a few stats to kind of hint at that. So let's take a look at what his numbers actually wind up looking like, because they are extremely impressive. So just for a comparative, Willson Contreras batting at about a 253 average. Now, Willson Contreras, we are wanting a lot of offensive power. The home runs, RBIs, runs scored is actually quite surprising considering the offense that he's been in. But if you actually look at his stats, he's doing a little bit better in terms of getting on base, which is obviously nice. You don't want to have a power hitter that winds up getting on base barely at all. Benintendi, we've already kind of covered that track. However, Josh Bell is actually raking it. He has been phenomenal, especially compared to how he was last season. You have Josh Bell right now batting at an average of 311, 13 home runs. This number is the kicker. 50 RBI. That's 15 more than Willson Contreras has. He has been in a situation that hasn't been all that much better than either Benintendi or Contreras, but you have the runs, you have the RBI, but if you look at these stats, he has been able, in this season compared to last year, look, he has a .05 rating higher on his batting average. We're talking about a 5% raise, or right around there on average. If you do OBP, as I do, astronomically higher there. His slugging percentage is higher, and you are also seeing his OPS, which is at a phenomenal .895. That is absolutely awesome. I can't even imagine what a guy like this is going to be able to do when he is put into a much better situation, where his lineup is not going to be a bunch of cast-offs and potentially without a Juan Soto. You wind up seeing Josh Bell sent to somewhere like a Milwaukee or any of these other contenders. Atlanta Braves don't necessarily need him, and New York doesn't either, but you can see over to the West, maybe he lands in a place like Houston. That would be a perfect situation for him, because they could definitely use a power bat like that. Obviously, the Dodgers are pretty much always in these types of situations, but the one that could be extremely intriguing is the New York Yankees, because the New York Yankees are having a really big problem right now with Joey Gallo, and Joey Gallo, as anybody who follows baseball knows, just straight up does not get on base. Josh Bell is getting on base with power. This is a guy that is going to get you over the top, because if you trade for him now, you are trading for the potential that he has if he gets to somewhere like a New York, or he gets to somewhere maybe like a San Francisco, or Houston, again, as I alluded to already. New York is going to definitely be looking for something to be able to compensate for the terrible way that Joey Gallo has put them in. I would look at Josh Bell as that sort of antidote, even though that offense is really phenomenal as it is. But they really need to worry about what they're going to do against the Astros. That seems like an inevitable ALCS matchup. And to have someone like Josh Bell in an offense that already has who is potentially the AL MVP and Aaron Judge, you wind up having Matt Carpenter, who's had a phenomenal year as well. Josh Bell, trade whatever you can in order to get him, especially if you need power. Josh Bell is going to be somebody that you are going to want to try to acquire. I would even go as far as to say that giving up somebody within the top 50 is not out of the range of possibility. Obviously, you want to be taking a look at seeing what the lineup looks like around them. Someone like a Contreras, in fact, would actually be kind of perfect because unlike Contreras, Bell is not only getting on base, he is hitting with power, and it's almost guaranteed he's going to get into a phenomenal situation. Contreras, on the other hand, we aren't certain because a lot of prospects are going to need to come to the Cubs, whereas Washington's concern is going to be substantially more on getting the prospect side of the trades over on the side of the Juan Soto trades. And so, again, cannot hammer this point enough. You desperately need to get Josh Bell. Josh Bell is going to get you into the playoffs. He is going to be a guy in late August that you are going to absolutely love. And now is the time, because the minute that he winds up moving, the minute that those trade rumors begin to circulate and we get a lot stronger towards the deadline, you're going to wind up having a lot harder time acquiring this guy. So if I were to personally, I guess if you would, power rank all of these guys here, my number one absolutely is going to be Josh Bell without question. Depending on situation, I would actually say Benintendi is going to be a really solid target because you're going to have a lot of runs, you're going to have a really high batting average getting on base, while also having potentially a lot of RBI as well, because not only is he going to be getting on base, hopefully he's in a lot better offense than the Royals. Contreras will be last because there's just a lot of question marks about where he's going to go. He is unquestionably one of the best prospects on the board, but considering the situation that he could wind up finding himself in, especially considering the niche nature in which catcher is, you can never go wrong with getting a first baseman / a DH, depending on, obviously, what your rosters look like. Josh Bell, then Benintendi, then Contreras. In terms of what I would do for how much, with Bell, there is no price to me that would be too high unless you are giving up the entirety of a positional strike. Benintendi, I would definitely go with a top 100 player to acquire him. And in terms of Contreras, that's going to be more of a vibe check for yourself. It's going to be good to add him. You're definitely going to like to have him in your back pocket, but the other two are going to be more essential. So that is kind of the long and short of it for our discussion here about the trade deadline. Those three are the guys, especially batting. Next week we'll be looking at pitchers. So for anybody, especially, I know those of you out there who have desperate need for some relief help, I'll be getting you some of those guys. I can already tell you David Bednar is going to be somebody that you're going to want to take a look for. We'll get into that more, especially trade rumors are going to be ramping up, so make sure that you stay tuned and always remember to click the bell for notifications regarding breaking news, especially anything related to fantasy. We'll be really on track of that news as the trade deadline approaches. And subscribe for any other DSN news, the other shows that we have. And again, as another reminder to make sure that whenever that news breaks that Josh Bell goes to the New York Yankees, that you know so you can get that deal in. I'ma get it, you know I be on the way.